times, and really like sort of delving into looking at the books themselves, what you see in there, sort of the implications for that. I know we have some string players in here, so I'm hoping to have a rich discussion. Uh, just let me preface this by saying I will be doing some talking, but I'm hoping to get as much discussion as possible. So please jump in if you have thoughts, but I'll absolutely be asking for your thoughts and connections. So, uh, it's always hard with the full screen Zoom share. Okay, goals for today. I chose three method books that we're going to look at and compare today. They are the Essential Elements book for strings, which is there's also a version for band. Jump Right In, the music learning theory adoption for the instrumental classroom, and then the Suzuki books. So you probably, if you're a string player, have some experience with Essential Elements. It tends to be one of the most popular beginning string books. I'm assuming that if you've played strings, maybe you've seen it before. If you took, was it used in the strings method class? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Jump Right In. You may be less familiar with this actual method book, but it's based on music learning theory. And then Suzuki is widely used for private lessons, but I am always surprised at how many school teachers also implement the Suzuki curriculum. Anyway, goals for today: examine curricular artifacts of each method book, identify pedagogical implications of various ways of presenting musical content, and then extrapolate potential shortcomings of each book. So this is a safe space where you are allowed to criticize. I have no alliance with any of these method books, and I encourage you to be critical in your discussion. Okay, here are the covers. Not that interesting, but I will note for the rest of the presentation, they'll always be presented in this order with Essential Elements on the left, Jump Right In the middle, and Suzuki on the right whenever we're comparing the three. These scans are from the cello book because I just happen to have book one for the cello version of all of these, and I didn't have that for violin. So we'll be looking at bass clef. Obviously, all of this would transfer to violin, viola, or bass in the appropriate way. Okay, very first thing. So most books start off with some sort of introduction, talking about how to take care of your instrument, maybe some discussion of posture. We will come back to those things in a moment, but I wanted to look at the very first content presented in each book. This is the first page where we either see notation or there's something introduced to us. I want you to look at all three. Just give me your initial reactions, and then already be thinking, given that this is the very first thing the book is introducing to us, what does that say about maybe where this book is going or philosophies embedded in the book or pedagogical issues? First of all, literally, what do you see? Yeah, Jonathan.
Well, jump right in is literally jumping right in with like more than just open strings.
Yeah, exactly. There's no open strings page in the Jump Right In book, and you will notice that we're not even doing a tune on the first page of content. That is not to say that a teacher would necessarily start right here. Obviously, there's lots of things that you would introduce to your students even before opening the book. And I hope you think about not necessarily the book as being the thing to start on day one, but the thing when it is appropriate, you would introduce the book. So for all of these, it's probably assumed that there's going to be other stuff going on in the music classroom before you get to that page. What else, though? What do we see here? Yes, Kai.
I was gonna say Essential Elements is very good for people who are like just starting off with music, especially because like they already have like the notes names like listed on the notes themselves, and they're starting off like right on the open strings.
Yeah, okay, so we got open strings from the very beginning. We have some help reading the notation. Yeah, Rebecca.
Essential Elements also is only using one length of rhythm versus Suzuki, where we have the 16th notes and 8th notes. Also, those are different in the sense that next, I know in Essential Elements we're going to do half notes. So like those two different breakdowns of rhythm. And in Jump Right In, there's no rhythm. It's just the note heads.
Yeah, yeah, interesting thoughts about rhythm. I just want to hear everyone, and then I'll chat. So Nelson.
Yeah, going off what Rebecca just said. So I guess the first two, I'm sorry for forgetting though. I think essential elements and jump right in. They both, I mean, even though there's half notes there, you really wouldn't even the students really wouldn't even need to have that great of a concept of rhythm. Like you could just kind of say, we're gonna play for this long. But whereas the Suzuki, the students would kind of need to know how to differentiate those rhythms there to kind of navigate through that very first page. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Joseph.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so when I was in upper strings and lower strings last semester, we did an assignment, a curriculum assignment based on the Essential Elements book, and I wrote over 30 pages for each class of like how I would do step by step of the Essential Elements book. So like, and that's very basic. So I can't imagine like I would probably have written like 100 pages if I was doing like the Jump Right In and the Suzuki book. We also looked at the Suzuki book, but it's just like I just think it's kind of like having the key signature and like having all that stuff is just like, especially when you're trying to learn the mechanics of the instrument, it can be very challenging. So
Mm. Yeah. I think what some people are getting at is sort of the even just like the density of stuff on these pages. If you just look at this, the amount of space left in the essential elements, it's much more sort of visually accessible to a student. We have 4 exercises. They all focus on just the D and the A string. While there's a whole lot more on Jump Right In and Suzuki. Let's consider. Oh yeah, Kyle.
So I think one of the important things to know is like so Suzuki is mostly done without any music in most cases when kids are just starting. So they don't see any of this. When I was a tiny little kid, I started Suzuki. I didn't read music for 2 years. So everything you see in the book, take that with a massive grain of salt. Except if you're doing like a purely Suzuki approach, they won't see any of that ever. I think one thing to note that for all of these are on the D string for cello, but like in a classroom, Suzuki doesn't really work as well because violins would be starting on the A string. They would be Everyone starts on the upper 2 strings, but essential elements and jump right in. I don't know about jump right in, but I know essential elements for sure. It's all on the D string, so it's much more conducive for a class.
Yes, absolutely. So to that first point, the students, a true Suzuki teacher would not show this to the students. And that seems a little counterintuitive that you're giving the book to the student, but not expecting them to look at it. But it is as much of a reference for, I think you almost said it, Kyle, a parent or someone else helping the student, or the teacher themselves. Just a review of what we need to go through um, at this very beginning stages, and students wouldn't necessarily experience that. So that sort of accounts for that perhaps slightly more complicated notation. We wouldn't expect a beginning Suzuki student to be able to read ba 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 ba, right? But we expect them to be able to echo that back on their instrument fairly easily. One more thought, one more question about this, and then we'll continue. And maybe I started to allude to this, but what is the primary skill being taught on each of these pages? Yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, so the essential elements starts off pizzicato, so it's really trying to build a foundation of getting the strings to resonate and just not only that, like reading the music itself. Jump right in is kind of all right, I think you already have a little bit of knowledge on how music works, so we're gonna look at these intervals and build theory along with technical ability. And Suzuki is kind of a hands-on giant classroom. Here we're gonna talk about bow usage. I mean, that's what I see on all these pages.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just work backwards. Bowing is the number one issue at the beginning of the Suzuki book, right? They're not, although there is some fingered notes down here in the second half, the majority of this is just getting students to echo ba 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 pepperoni pizza on their open strings. That's really it. Then we get into adding fingers. You will see that down the line, Essential Elements doesn't even like mention the bow until page 10 or so. So that comes much later. So that gives you a sense of where the priority is in each of these. So then going back to Essential Elements, clearly notation is highly important in this particular pedagogy, right? This page is meant for beginning readers who are looking at music for the first time. Jump Right In, though, is giving us tonal patterns. And I would encourage you not to necessarily think about this as starting with music theory, but rather starting with students' attention to harmonic function. I know we have done some sort of music learning theory S stuff in MLD in the past. But again, this is not necessarily what students would be expected to be following along with their eyes at the very, very beginning. If we could look back at the introductory material, it would emphasize that we're going to play this first and students are going to echo this back to us before we're actually looking at the page. That being said, a student might have it open while you're doing that, and that might be a really great opportunity for students to make a connection without you even suggesting it, right? Imagine you say, oh, let's just open up to page 1, just leave it open, you don't need to really worry about that, just listen to what I'm playing, but you play these in this order each time. That might be sort of a way to push students towards notation without necessarily asking them to do it explicitly. Okay, next part. What I did next is I took Twinkle Twinkle, which appears in all 3 books, and just gave you a screenshot of how Twinkle Twinkle is presented. Again, I want you to think about what is prioritized based on what you see here. So we got 2 pages. We have some variations. What is being prioritized in this version of Twinkle Twinkle? Yeah, Joseph?
Oh, it's all about like the articulations and bow strokes and like how the bow strokes affect articulation.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have 4 different variations, each one with a different rhythm and a different articulation. One of Suzuki's biggest tenets is establishing a good quality tone on open strings or on simple fingered melodies before we're doing anything else. So while Twinkle Twinkle itself is important here, notice the theme isn't even shown until the very end of the page. The emphasis really here is getting students to use different bowing patterns and set up a good bow hold, establish a good right hand technique. Let's look at Twinkle Twinkle in Jump Right In. Very different looking. Everything from our meter to what our variations look like. What is being prioritized in this presentation of Twinkle Twinkle? Yeah, Nolan.
Maybe just proficiency with moving fingers across strings and to get different notes. And like since it's in 2/2, it makes me think you have less time in between notes to switch. So just getting the fingerings under, like just being able to properly play the correct fingerings in a smaller amount of time is probably maybe the focus of this.
Okay. Yeah. The notation actually physically looks different, right? Here we're using eighth notes and quarter notes, which in my head sort of maybe connects back to the focus on macrobeat and microbeat. While we can show macro and microbeat with quarter notes and half notes, a lot of the Jump Right In materials use eighth notes and quarters to demonstrate macro and micro. And that is my assumption of why they chose to notate it like that. As far as the 2/4, that might also be because of the prominence of like identifying duple meters and triple meters in Jump Right In, as opposed to your standard 4/4 that most books start with. Thinking about, though, beyond the melody at the top, what else would a teacher use this for? I'm gonna give 1 second before I go to Joseph. I appreciate you, Joseph, but I'd love to hear from some others. Yeah, Sui.
Yeah, maybe the instructor who played accompaniment, or yeah, something with the ensemble or piano or something, another instrument.
Yeah, absolutely. So you notice that there's chord symbols included here, which doesn't happen in either of the other books, both at the top and at the bottom. So a teacher might, you're right, use this to play along as a duet with the student on the piano or some other instrument. What else? Yeah, Kyle.
I think there's more of a focus on harmony and hearing other people play the same parts. It's more like collaborative music making than like both Essential Elements and Suzuki, where it's everybody's playing in total unison. So it's just more about hearing harmony.
Absolutely. So rather than viewing Twinkle Twinkle as a single linear experience for students to play from the beginning to the end, we're looking vertically at different alternative things that we can do with Twinkle Twinkle. So in line 2, we get this little harmony part. Notice that this harmony part is just on the D string. Might be easier depending on your student. What you don't get in this harmony part is sometimes the most challenging part of Twinkle Twinkle, which is going from the open A down to 4th finger on the D string, or E and A if you're doing violin. So we're providing a second part. You could even think about this as a possibility for differentiation, right? Maybe a student isn't comfortable making that leap from open to 4th finger, and so we ask them to join us on the second part, where we're just using 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of in order on that string. Moving the other direction then, the third part might be something that a more advanced student could play, while others are either playing the melody or part 2. And again, we're really outlining the chords, emphasizing that sense of harmony. So again, rather than having a single linear line, we have multiple parts that are fitting together and emphasizing harmony. At the bottom, clearly here, there's not even any notation. This is, well, why would this be here? Where else do you see similar notation like this?
And like improvisation for jazz stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's really common to just see the chords when there's some expectation of improvisation. So this is an opportunity to reinforce harmonic function across the song rather than melody. Okay, one more of Twinkle Twinkle. So interesting. Here is Twinkle Twinkle in Essential Elements. What's different? What's the same? What are the implications? And I would encourage you to look at sort of all information on the page here. Kyle.
So the other one raising his hand too. Which one?
Oh, sorry. I was. We'll go with you first, and then we'll jump to the other Kyle.
Well, I can tell this is still towards like the beginning of. Well, first of all, it's number 43. You can tell they're still focusing on quarter notes. First of all, as the rest of the page also focuses on quarter notes the entire time.
Yeah, absolutely. So rhythmically, again, it's notated differently. We are at page 15 now, 43 examples in, and we're still pretty much just using quarter notes and quarter rests. What else? Well, actually, I know the other Kyle, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
So Essential Elements uses the like 7 quarter notes in a row rhythm. That's like one of the big things, and that's how they introduce every single note. So it's 7 quarter notes then a rest, and like that's what they did in like every other song before. So rhythmically, they're not adding much new, and it's still in pizzicato. So they're still taking a lot of time to like totally have the bow either not work on it at all or work on it in a totally separate way.
Yes, yes. Interesting thing, that connection with the 7-note patterns. It is so many of the first examples are ba 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 ba. That second part matching exactly the Mozart melody. And Kyle, I'll be honest, that is a connection I'd never made in my head. So I appreciate you making that connection for us today. Jonathan, did you have something, or were you just on mute by accident?
I'm not on mute by accident, but I could say something.
Okay, then we'll go to Rebecca.
So,
I was just going to say that you see, like right after Twinkle, they introduce key signature. So during the Mozart melody, they have an accidental for F sharp instead of putting in the key, which I kind of like because it reinforces that it's because sometimes when we start in like D major land, the kids don't remember that the F we're playing is actually F sharp. They'll just start to know it as F. And I think someone already said we're still pizzicato.
Yeah.
Which so long in pizzicato.
Yeah, and that isn't to say, and I'm sure you recognize this, Rebecca, that a teacher might not start to introduce bow hold or bowing on open strings prior to this. But if you're sort of like sticking to essential elements page by page, you're right, it takes till page 15. That could easily be several months of work with a beginning string ensemble. It is not uncommon for fifth grade, sixth grade string teachers to wait to introduce the bow until the winter concert. So the winter concert, they'll do pizzicato, and after that, we'll start playing with the bow. Again, something that is debatable, and it could go either way, right? There's definitely a value to really establishing right-hand technique. Students are able to play tunes right away because they can play different notes. They're really only focusing on one thing. On the other hand, the bow is so much more complicated and hard than students expect, and by delaying it, maybe we're even making that harder. Maybe Suzuki's idea of introducing it right at the very beginning is a helpful thought. There's one other thing I noticed on this page, and no one's mentioned it, but I want to see if anyone else has anything to say. What do we have at the top? Music history.
Yeah.
So this is the only of the three books that ever gets into any kind of musical history. And also notice that I didn't even mention this before. The title of the tune is different, right? It's titled "A Mozart Melody" rather than "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star," which I think is an interesting choice. Most people don't think of "Twinkle Twinkle" as a Mozart melody because it's so common. But there's certainly an emphasis here on sort of setting up some of those big names with students from the very beginning, something you don't get in other books. Thoughts about including music history from the beginning, especially someone like Mozart? Yeah, Brian.
I think that, at least from my perspective, I think it's kind of it can be an important element if you have the time, just because if a kid's starting music, I think Mozart's such a big name that, like, oh, you've been in music class and you don't know who Mozart is, especially if it's been here and your parents say that and they're like, that's weird, like, because that's just, I feel like when you're talking about like the non-musician type of perspective of things, there's like certain pieces of different history that they only know, and that's almost how they measure sometimes music education. Like, oh, you're doing all this cool stuff that's advanced, but you don't even know who Mozart is, like what? So just something to ponder about. It's not, I don't think it's essential in the grand scheme of things of like trying to get them to do what we actually want them to do. But it's like, I think subtle enough where it's like, oh, Mozart was this and done. And you move on.
Brian, there's so many interesting thoughts in there. And I wonder if anyone wants to respond before I say anything more. So I will say, so I think that idea of like Mozart sort of as a signifier of your formal education is a fascinating thing, right? I'm sure that's what Brian said is not a surprise to anyone. I think some of us might be appalled if we had gotten to music school and not known who Mozart was at this point. That is certainly something that is established in our music education tradition. I also encourage you to think about why Mozart, and who are some other people that we could that we could use to signify formal music education. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah. So, um, I'll be honest. Uh, like well, obviously I knew Mozart was. Like I must say I didn't know what that was. But before I took music history and I got into college, I didn't really know too much about classical music. In all honesty, like I learned a lot of what I learned from like marching band and stuff like that, which is just like how it happened for me. So I think that, especially for like kids, I don't really think that Mozart is always the exact representation of who they are and what they listen to. So perhaps like you should try to think of things that they might like. I'm not saying Mozart's bad. I like his music, but I'm not saying he's the end all be all either.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of choices of who we want to choose to highlight in our class. I will point out that prior to this, you won't know this from looking at this presentation, but maybe people familiar with the book. There's this tune called Seminole Chant that occurs before this in Essential Elements. And there's no discussion of the history of Native American music. There's no acknowledgement of maybe who had written that tune or where that tune had come from. And those are things that we might choose to do some of the time. So on that note, just a second, one really quick thing. If you have not looked at today's Google Doodle, I would highly recommend it. It's a music educator. Dr. Bonveri, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say also that I think it's pretty much in agreement that this wasn't actually written by Mozart, so that throws another wrench in the machine for the way that this particular page was set up, and that could also become a good a whole different point of departure for a discussion with students, right? Is attributing music to certain people, and where does that history come from?
Yes, exactly. I suspect that the choice to call it a Mozart melody was perhaps an excuse to add in a little bit about Mozart. I don't know. I wasn't the one who decided on this book. Anyway, we got so much more to talk about in so little time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about getting into technical exercises, or what some people call executive skills. So I took one of the pages that sort of shows technical pictures from each of the books just to compare them here. This one is actually from the back of the Suzuki book. The Suzuki book does not include any of these charts up front. It only happens at the end. Again, that might be based on the assumption that the teacher is actually doing more of the modeling. But this is really the only sort of picture or diagram showing how to play the instrument. Notice they are actual photographs, which I think is actually a nice thing. Some you'll see in the other two, they use just line drawings. A very clear, like multiple angles. We see the right hand technique from a few different angles. One of the things I find very confusing about these two pages is just the way they're organized. On the left, we see G sharp exercise, and then just a finger chart that includes everything that students have done plus G sharp, which is an extension on fourth finger. But you look at the pictures below, and she's showing us G natural. On the other side, we get sort of an extension of that. Maybe this is what they actually mean by the G sharp exercise. So we get a little melody here. Again, attaching it to fingering charts, but then finally down here we actually see that her doing that extension down here. Interesting, just things I noticed. Okay, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. This is the fingering chart from Jump Right In. What stands out to you? Jonathan?
The left hand technique just looks terrible. Like it's not well drawn. I mean, I'm personally an essential elements learner, and I hated the diagrams in that too. But it just doesn't show the way the hand shape should be. It just looks like you're really tense and just not great at all.
Yeah, absolutely. The neck of the cello is angled, which I think is a strange choice. Generally, I mean, yes, it's angled back towards us, but the implication of this is that it's somehow angled left or right. And yes, absolutely, I hope no one looks at this and teaches anyone how to do left-hand cello technique based on these pictures. That being said, the original version from Jump Right In had even worse pictures. I can't even really describe them except for as like sort of lines rather than fingers. So this is actually an improvement on that. But yes, not great modeling for left-hand technique. What else do we notice? Not a trick question at all. What are fingers associated with here? Yes, Alexi.
I don't know if I'm answering that question, but I just wanted to point out that I think it's very cluttered.
Hmm.
And I feel like the hands are covering the strings, and you have to like look really closely to see what's going on there.
Yeah.
At
Yeah,
least,
absolutely.
yeah. And
Yeah,
for little kids, I don't know. I feel like it needs to be more simplified.
for sure. The strings are very close together. You do sort of have to look closely to see which string is which. One little thing. Okay, so you can see my mouse, right? So this, in most books, we would say, oh, that's F sharp. We would also say, oh, this is, oh, also this one is F sharp. What is Jump Right In doing differently? Yeah, Brian.
Well, I was gonna say like it's kind of good. Exactly what I'm gonna say is kind of answers, half not answers it. My comment was just gonna be that. I mean, again, I'm not as familiar with this book, so I don't know if this is like their main resource for these like introducing these notes. But I think if you were like somebody our age that was learning a secondary instrument, this could be really helpful. For somebody that's just starting out with no prior experience, it's already a lot for them to remember the note name. Like so, like implying solfege that they may or may not know, depending on their background. It's just like, okay, I'm gonna say do re mi, and I'm gonna go through this, but at the end of the day, they might not even know what notes they're playing. Which sometimes, if you like, I even noticed from when I was in high school, there were some musicians that not just on string instruments, but also in band instruments that learned how to finger notes, but actually didn't remember which notes were which, and they struggle with that. And I think that might reinforce bad habits, specifically for a situation where you might read music more often. Now, of course, if you're doing oral training, this is a great tool that you could incorporate, I think, separately, not as like a solid resource.
Yeah. Jonathan, I'm going right to you.
Can we just talk about why there's two different do's on the same page? And it goes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and then shows an open D again, and then goes to T, and then T is in G, and then it goes to do as G, and then it does more solfege. Like that just makes it really confusing.
Great points. Yeah. This it takes some time to figure out what is going on in this chart, period, right? You might expect do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti all to be in order, but they don't do that. What's really getting and like honestly a few more lines or a square around up here I think would really help resolve this. But the whole top of the page is D do. They're showing this low so because we want to, I guess, be able to let's give students the opportunity to play that low so, especially for bass lines. But we don't even get T, right? In D major, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. That's it. We don't get T, even though we could fairly easily play third finger on the A string. I would understand not including T on the G string because that's an extension, but I see no reason to leave that out. And I think we're all sort of working around this and getting this idea. So people who are more, were following Jump Right In more strictly would not actually be teaching note names at this point. Would just be teaching third finger as mi, and first finger is re, and open is D, and not even using note names at this point. Jump Right In flips that entirely around, so students are first associate fingers with solfege, and then later attach names to them. Very interesting thing. Something I hope you consider playing around with. I've had success doing both. Uh, I'm thinking back to the 1 year where I was like, okay, this year I'm just doing solfege fingerings. I'm not going to tell them the names of the notes at all. There were some wonderful advantages. Students picked up on tunes super, super quickly. I could sing something on solfege and they could play it back to me quite quickly. When I started to try to do note names. That did become confusing for them because I had been saying D or I'd been saying do forever, and suddenly I was saying D. I realize it's 11:40, so I will let Dr. Boomberry have the final word.
Peter, thank you so much. You brought up some really important topics for teachers. I love the fact that you've given us some specific, detailed images and issues, but then also those point to much larger questions for us as teachers. And I hope that what Peter has brought us and what has been discussed today is triggering in your mind additional thoughts about, well, what would I do about this? What sorts of choices will I make about how I use materials in my classrooms? What might I leave out of a method book in terms of instruction or actually steer students away from? We're not really going to worry about page 5. Let's do it this way instead. It'll be better for you. Those are questions that you really need to take seriously. And it's highly unlikely you're going to find a method book that gives you exactly what you want. So you need to be thinking about how do you pull your resources together. We'll have a chance to extend that sort of thinking on Wednesday because we'll be taking a look at some band method books. And we'll look at them as band method books in sort of a separate way, but then also parallels across the examples you saw today and the ones that you'll see on Wednesday. And continue the discussion I just brought up about pedagogical implications for what's in there and perhaps what's not in there sometimes. A few things I'd like to leave you with, actually. The first is cameras in here. A few of you are off camera today. Totally fine. I'm going to repeat that it's at any time. It's absolutely fine for you to turn off your camera if it's better for you to do so. However, I will leave the ball in your court and say, anytime that you can have your camera on, please do. And we've been really good about this in general this semester. Peter is presenting and taking questions and comments and so forth. It's so much more inspiring for the teacher and for all the students to be able to see everybody and feel like people are really interacting. So I'll just remind you about that, and I won't bug you about it, but please do any moment you possibly can be on camera, be on for the good of the class. The other thing is, then I want to, actually, before I forget, Brian Morris, would you stick around just for a second after class today? Just want to check with you about something else. And then for all of us, you should have gotten from me, or you will the next time you're in your inbox, your email inbox, the email about externships. It's time to contact your cooperating teacher. Those of you that are in pairs, according to the schedule, as I said on Friday, put your heads together, get your information collated so that you can just send him one email. That'll just reduce traffic for him and for you in the long run. Any questions about that, obviously shoot me an email at any point. But this is, I'll reiterate the very end of that email, this is your first contact with this professional teacher. So make a good impression right from the beginning. Get the ball rolling and do that as soon as you can so that they have plenty of time to plan for you. Reminder about the basic structure of these. The first week is observation, and the cooperating teacher will be, sort of welcoming you into the class and just giving you a sense through their regular teaching of how that group functions. And then the second, third, and fourth subsequent weeks, you'll be helping out with teaching according to what the cooperating teacher feels is most useful, most beneficial. All right, I mentioned it briefly at the beginning of the semester. At this point in your careers in TIM, I really would like to treat these as a sort of a mini student teaching experience. And when you go into student teaching, that's exactly what you'll do. You'll go into an environment that's not yours, but that you are going to be expected to be an integral part of it. And you'll figure out how that environment works along with your cooperating teacher. And your cooperating teacher will gradually put you into more and more responsibilities within the classroom. And so this is like a microcosm of that experience. That means that I'm not by any means going to micromanage your relationship and experience with that cooperating teacher and the students. That ball is definitely in their court and your court, and they certainly know that. And they're great about working with you on that. That, however, does not mean that at any time you can't shoot me an email if there's something that you want to clarify, or something's not working like you think it ought to, or something that you need to let me know, all right, or to ask. So I'm always here for you, but I'm also pushing you out of the temple nest a little bit and saying this is for you and your cooperating teacher to do, all right? It's a great opportunity for you, great experience for you. You do not need to submit lesson plans for your externships. You do not need to record your Zoom meetings, and you won't be allowed to do that, of course. But what you do need to do is write an evaluation document for each week. The first one for the observation week, week 1, is a little different because you're observing, and then the second, third, and fourth are actually identical, and they're reflections on your teaching as part of your externship. All right, so those are in Canvas, all set up, should be really self-explanatory. Any questions right now on externships? Anything you need to know at the moment? Make that work? All right, then I'm going to cut you all loose. Do get onto those emails, and then Brian, if you could stick around for a second, we'll see you all back here on Wednesday.
Dr. B, I just had one quick